Playing Nirvana.
The Cobain 50.
Nirvana.
Kurt Cobain's top 50 albums.
Nirvana.
From listener-powered KEXP.
This is the Cobain 50 from listener-powered KEXP. I'm Martin Douglas.
And I'm Dusty Henry. This week, Janice Headley dives into the album Beach Party by Marine Girls, which dropped in 1981.
And man, I revisited this album for the first time in many years, and I forgot how good it was. I can't wait to talk to you about the idea of Marine Girls essentially being the under-recognized pioneers of twee music. So here is Janice Headley with the classic Beach Party by Marine Girls.
Nope. No need to check your podcast player. You are still listening to the Cobain 50 podcast. It might surprise you to learn there's just 1 degree of separation between Nirvana and the London duo Everything But the Girl, who released the smash club hit Missing back in 1994.
And I miss you.
That 1 degree brings us to today's episode, the album on Kurt's list. The band is called Marine Girls, and their 1981 debut album is titled Beach Party.
Honey wants possession of my heart, wants to know the secret of my dreams, doesn't understand my treachery. I know I'll love him forever, or until I find another boy. La, 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 la.
Formed in 1980, the members of Marine Girls were really just girls. Tracy Thorn and Gina Hartman were just high school students. London and the burgeoning punk scene were just a little over an hour's drive away from their hometown of Hatfield, Hertfordshire, England. In her 2013 memoir, titled Bedsit Disco Queen, Tracy writes about seeing bands like the Sex Pistols on TV and seeing the Clash play in Trafalgar Square when she was only 15 years old.
London calling, yes, I was there too. And you know what they said? Well, some of it was true.
They were inspired by bands like the Slits and the Raincoats, both bands who've had previous episodes dedicated to them in the Cobain 50 podcast. Tracy says when they formed Marine Girls, they thought of the Slits as, quote, their scary big sisters, end quote. As Tracy writes in her other memoir, 2019's Another Planet, A Teenager in Suburbia, quote, out there in the big wide world beyond my bedroom, there were women getting to work who were less afraid and who were going to help change my life and liberate me. And I would owe so much to them as they'd open up a world of possibility. End quote. Tracy and Gina recruited bassist Jane Fox and her sister Alice on vocals and drums. Here's Jane on the podcast C86 show.
In kind of like 1980, 1981, there was this phenomenal amount of activity off the back of punk, where I lived in a new town in Hertfordshire, and it was pretty boring. But suddenly, everybody was in a band, and there were loads of people producing fanzines, loads of people buying all their clothes from jumble sales, and, you know, bucking what teenagers or young women were supposed to look like. And the Slits and the Raincoats were really inspiring on that front. The whole place just caught fire. So there was a phenomenal local scene in Hatfield and St Albans where I grew up, and there were punk bands there, and then there were bands like us that were kind of not punk bands, but just suddenly going, oh my God, we can be in a band because everyone's in a band, and you don't need to be a musician to be in a band. You just have got to have something to say.
When I hear that tune on the record player, when I hear that song on the breeze, thinking Thinking of the times we used to spend together, thinking of the times we used to sing alone.
Within months, they had written and recorded a 10-song debut cassette titled A Day by the Sea.
1, 2, 3, 4.
They pulled together their after-school job money to pay for it, and only 50 copies were made.
Here she comes now and she's walking down the street. Sounds so nice that it really gets to me. Hate that girl, you know we hate that girl. Who's that next? Catch one of push her bets. Whatever she wants, well, that's what she gets. She's not shy, you know she never hesitates. She's the girl that is just must be hate. Hate that girl, you know we hate that girl.
The cassette was sold via J&J Records in Hatfield, and they took out an ad in the back of NME magazine with Tracy's family's home address printed on it. Unlike the avant-garde pop of the Raincoats or the more jagged sound of the Slits, Marine Girls brought a sweeter sensibility with their lo-fi compositions, jangly guitars, and charming melodies.
There she sits without a care in the world, wondering if they're true the rumors she's heard. Quiet evening with absent friends, photographs of long weekends.
It's a term they hate, but they set the standard for twee pop. Tracy and Alice split the lead vocal duties, each bringing a girlish vulnerability to their songs. Here's Jane talking about the songwriting process to the C86 show.
Well, we would just help each other out, really. We'd go with a kind of an idea for a song, like lyrics and a song. We would go with a song that needed something else, like a guitar or a bass line or some percussion. And we'd kind of just play around and just enjoyed being together. I mean, Tracy and I used to write quite a lot of poetry as well, and we were very close friends. So we had this kind of sharing our heartfelt experiences kind of friendship, and it kind of, the songwriting was quite closely connected to that.
The self-released cassette caught the attention of Pat Birmingham, a local guy who had a mobile recording studio he would sometimes set up in his garden shed. The plan was to re-record the songs written for A Day by the Sea and re-release it on his own label, In Phase, and then press it on vinyl via Wham Records, the label ran by Dan Tracy of the band Television Personalities. Upon its re-release, they retitled the LP as Beach Party.
What every girl should be, try so hard, trying to be. What every girl should be, making my good with children, not too bright and no opinions, bright and pretty, sweet and willing, finds every party thrilling.
With improved production and wider availability, the album began to attract attention. Rough Trade Records took 50 copies of the album, planning to send 25 of those to America. Legendary DJ and tastemaker John Peel began playing their songs on BBC Radio. It also caught the attention of Mike Alway at Cherry Red Records, who signed them to his label. Remarkably, all of this happened within the span of 1 year.
Some girls are really obvious, and with a sidelong glance, you see them smile at every word you say. Some girls like to play cool, you can stare and stare, but they give nothing away. Some boys think they're really it, don't want to talk to you, cause all they want to do is impress. Some boys use the same old lines to say you want to dance, to say what's your name, oh let me guess, hold me tight, what we doing tonight.
Sadly, by the summer, Gina's parents had made her quit the band. Just a reminder of how young these kids really were. And by that fall, Tracy had begun her first year as an English major at the University of Hull. It was there that she met Ben Watt, also a student and also a Cherry Red recording artist.
I've been down to North Marine Drive, a road curling round by your sea.
The pair fell in love and began writing songs together under the name Everything But the Girl.
You are all I need. You are all I need.
Their very very first release together was a 7-inch single featuring a cover of the Cole Porter classic, Night and Day.
Whether near to me or far, no matter, darling, where you are, I think of you night and day.
And funnily enough, a cover of the Marine Girls song, On My Mind.
You got me feeling so happy, feeling so sad. I only smile now when you're with me. She got it bad.
Here's the original Marine Girls version, just to compare.
You got me feeling so happy, feeling so sad. Only smile now when you're with me. She's got it bad.
Marine Girls were still a band, but with Tracy at Hull and Jane and Alice away at art school, cracks were starting to form. The band were featured on the cover of Melody Maker magazine and interviewed by the NME. But Tracy was spending more time with Ben and had even released a solo album in 1982 titled A Distant Shore.
Meetings arranged, they say never work out. I say we've proved them wrong without doubt. I can't remember now just what we said. I never could have guessed what lay ahead. As I ran towards you up the stairs, little voice in my ear cry, beware.
The album featured songs Tracy had written for Marine Girls, but which felt too personal to perform with the band. Here's Tracy being interviewed with the Marine Girls on BBC Radio 1 in 1983.
Tracy, how does the whole thing relate between the Marine Girls, Everything But the Girl, and solo releases from you? I mean, are you a Marine Girl, or are you Tracy Thorne, or part of Everything But the Girl?
The Marine Girls was what I was doing first. That was really my introduction to music with the Marine Girls. And then when I went up to Hull was when I branched out into other things, simply because I was up there on my own. And it just seemed natural to continue with music.
They all do seem to correlate, actually. Musically, they're in a similar area all the time.
Yes, yeah, that's probably true.
Imagine a sunny holiday, a little parasol cafe, corner table for two, and that is me and you.
By September of that year, Marine Girls had finished recording their second album, titled Lazy Ways, produced by Stuart Moxham of Young Marble Giants, who you'll hear more about in a future episode of the Cobain 50. It was released in the spring of 1983, but tensions within the band led to a tense following tour. After a particularly disastrous concert in Glasgow, the Marine Girls called it a day.
I'm trying to be what every girl should be.
As Tracy writes in her memoir, Bedsit Disco Queen, Marine Girls ended badly, and to be honest, we've never really recovered. But that takes nothing away from what we had, and what we were, and what we did. End quote. And what they did was inspire later generations of artists. Like Calvin Johnson, founder of K Records and frontman for Beat Happening, who my coworker Martin Douglas beautifully covered in a recent episode of the Cobain 50.
Hey, Dogwood Day, dream so full of bloom. Stay a while here with me, please blow inside my room.
Calvin introduced Kurt to many of the bands who ended up on his list of 50 favorite albums, including Marine Girls, The Vaselines, The Raincoats, and more to come. Fast forward to 1994. Tracy had been asked to sing on the Massive Attack album Protection.
Don't drag me down just because you're down. Just cause you're blue, don't make me too. Though you found you need more than me, don't talk to me about being free.
And during an appearance on the TV show Later with Jules Holland, she was approached by another guest that night, Courtney Love. Here's Tracy from her memoir, Bedsit Disco Queen.
Just before the cameras started rolling, she looked across to our stage, put down her guitar, and strode across the empty central area to crouch down next to me where I was sitting. "Hey," she said, "you're Tracy from the Marine Girls. Kurt and I were both huge fans of your band." Kurt was not long dead at this point. "You know my band Hole? We do a cover of one of your songs called In Love."
Glad to hear you're feeling happy. Here you're getting along without me.
More or less speechless, I managed to mumble something polite in return before she strode back and the show began. The whole unlikely story only finally became real for me when Kurt Cobain's journals were published in 2002, and I was able to see for myself, in his own handwriting, our appearance in his many lists of favourite bands. There are the Marine Girls on page 128 and page 241, while on page 77, in a list of his all-time favourite songs, are two of mine, Honey and In Love. Most incredibly, on page 271, Beach Party is listed as one of Nirvana's top 50 albums, along with the Sex Pistols, The Clash, and Public Enemy.
Sadly, Kurt had just passed away around the time this encounter had happened, and he wouldn't be around to hear Tracy score a top 10 hit in America with Everything But the Girl.
And I miss you, like the deserts miss the rain. And I miss you, oh, like the deserts miss the rain.
But Kurt could surely have related to Tracy's response. As Everything But the Girl became more and more popular, she found herself wanting to retreat. In 1997, the band were invited to open for U2. But as she states in Bedsit Disco Queen,
the thought of stepping on stage in a 60,000-seater stadium somewhere in the Midwest, in front of an impatient rock audience, and attempting to sing Missing at them, fills me with a kind of stomach-churning horror.
Sounds like something Kurt himself might have said.
And I miss you. You found some better place, and I miss you. Like the deserts miss the rain.
That was Janice Headley digging into the album Beach Party by Marine Girls. So Martin, yeah, as you mentioned at the top, you're a big fan of this record. Let's talk about it. Like, what are your impressions of this record and experiences with it?
Man, I remember listening to it, must have been like 17, 18 years ago for the first time, because it was one of the albums on Kurt's list that I didn't immediately go investigate. Mm-hmm. It was just like, oh, the Raincoats. Oh, that sounds cool. I've heard about them. Like, oh my gosh, the Stooges. I've heard so much about them. I should actually listen to their music. And then, Marine Girls was kind of tucked really, really low on the list. And it was like, Marine Girls Beach Party. Like, okay, well, maybe one day.
Yeah.
And then, and then years later, I listened to it and it's just so pure that I became an instant fan. And I really took Beach Party to heart. And it was one of my favorite albums for a really specific period of time for me that I sort of forgot about. So listening to it for the first time in many years, like I said, it's so good. It's so good. And so much of the music I like now that we'll get into in a bit. But I'm thinking specifically of the Softies, who have a new album coming out imminently.
So exciting.
I don't think the Softies would be the same or maybe even exist without Marine Girls and Beach Party.
I feel like this album is like, I don't know if I'd actually ever listened to this one before. But like once going through, like this is like why we're doing this kind of album. Like of course, talk about Stooges and Pixies and Sex Pistols is super fun, but yeah, it's like these underrated gems, underappreciated, like should be classics. When you listen to, like, how have I not heard this before? That's what gets me out of bed in the morning in terms of music discovery. These bands that kind of feel like, to quote, like, Be Happening, like it's like our secret, you know. It's like if this album feels like a mixtape someone made you that you could never track down who the bands were, but like it just became so special and ingrained into your heart, just because it feels like no one else should know this, but I want everyone to know about it.
Yeah, when we think about Marine Girls as an underrated gem, I think in the indie pop twee community, this was a huge album. Like, you can hear the influence on Lois Maffio and a lot of the bands on K Records. You can hear record labels like Sarah Records and Postcard cropping up because of this band and bands that were influenced by this band. And I know that Calvin Johnson was a fan of Marine Girls and regularly sent Tracy Thorn albums by Beat Happening. So they definitely had a profound influence on the K record sound in particular.
So ahead of their time too, like 1981, it was before you saw a lot more of this type of thing. And now Bandcamp is full of bands that have this sort of lo-fi aesthetic, indie, a bedroom pop, you might call it now.
Yeah.
They just were living in the future.
Yeah. I mean, they adopted the DIY ethics around the time where people were starting to gravitate towards that. Like, they self-recorded and self-released their own tape a couple of years before Calvin did it with K Records. And now, like you're saying, yeah, like there's all sorts of bedroom pop artists that self-release their own material. And I think, this is kind of patient zero for the entire indie pop landscape. I can hear all of the threads that essentially sprung this entire twee movement.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
It's always a special moment when like you forget how much you love something. That was me with REM last week, where you're like, oh man, I do love this band. And like, it just like reawakens an obsession.
Yeah, absolutely. And this band was also very influential outside of the indie pop subculture. I'm thinking about a piece for The Quietest that Tracy Thorn wrote when she wrote about how a member of LCD Sound System, but she didn't say which member, she just said a member, said they were a huge Marine Girls fan. And it shows how much Marine Girls stretch out past this sort of codified, cloistered indie pop scene, and really speaks to this sort of secret language of cult favorite bands. When you say, hey, you like this band? Like, I went to a show headlined by the Detroit punk band Tyvek. Not a lot of people know who Tyvek are, but the people who know who Tyvek are, like, it's oh my God. Yeah. It's like, oh my God, Tyvek's touring. Tyvek hadn't toured in like 5 years, I think. And so, yeah, it was a big deal. And I love that Marine Girls is part of this sort of idea of a secret language where you can talk to somebody, maybe they have a Marine Girls pen or something, and you're like, oh, you like Marine Girls? It shows you who your people are in a way.
Yeah. I feel like I had a moment like that with you and Janice, actually, when I started working here with the band Eric's Trip.
Oh, yeah.
I mentioned, I was like, you guys know Eric's Trip? Like, oh my God, I have like found my people. Like, it was like such a moment of like, anyway. But yeah, it is that like, you automatically feel a connection with the person, because like, if you, for one, even found this band and then had a deep connection with it, we are spiritually bound now.
Yeah. Because it's not, like, it's not like a huge cultural thing like liking the Beatles or
Nirvana.
liking Kendrick Lamar or Nirvana or whoever. Like, you know, like those are more like generational sort of kind of monoculture, but not really, especially like monoculture doesn't exist now. Right. So, but like they are very much like cultural icons.
Right.
Whereas a band like Marine Girls or a band like Eric Stripp or Tyvek, you know, they are iconic in their own way, but on a much, much, much smaller scale. And I think that is very interesting when we're talking about how music affects communities. You forget how small some communities are out there.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, Kurt was one of these people who found and connected to this record. And I don't know, like it seems like, well, how do you think he connected with it?
I think in listening to it, you can kind of feel the femininity of it. And this record was definitely described as feminine and amateurish by rock critics of the day, which is, I think, a common thread between a lot of the music Kurt loved and a lot of the music that some Nirvana fans hated.
Right.
That's another thing about Kurt that we've been exploring in the series, how Kurt synthesizes these very pure, very quote unquote amateurish things that contain a lot of femininity and filters it through this this ridiculously abrasive and heavy band.
Yeah, it's like literally amplifying those ideas with his voice and guitar.
Yeah. Were you a fan of Tracy Thorn's later band, Everything But the Girl?
Yes. And so I was kind of mind blown realizing she was in Marine Girls. My wife loves Everything But the Girl. I love Everything But the Girl too. And so I've known her in that context as like electronic music, house music. To think that she got her start in like indie pop is kind of wild to think for where her career went.
Oh yeah.
And even then in the band, she didn't really want to sing initially, which is kind of wild to think it's Tracy Thorn. It's like an incredible, iconic voice.
Right, yeah. One of the singular singers of an entire era, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I think she sings like background on a lot of the songs. That's kind of cool to hear, but it's also a reminder of like, again, like with Kurt or any of these artists, like, you know, they all have diverse tastes as well, you know, and that's what these things build upon each other. Then when you listen to Everything But the Girl and then Marine Girls, like you can start to see like, actually, maybe it's not so different. The sense of melody and structure and things are all there. It's just different seasonings, I guess.
Yeah. I feel like there's this misconception, or at the very least, an uninformed opinion that Marine Girls is just a prelude to Everything But the Girl. But personally, and, you know, I've been saying this whole episode, that Marine Girls are a phenomenal group in their own right. And I think maybe it's the lack of mainstream cachet that Everything But the Girl had, or maybe it's like the idea that Marine Girls are kind of low stakes. But to me, it's unfair to the fact that Marine Girls were pioneers in this entire subculture. Yeah. To just say that, you know, it was Tracy Thorn's audition for Everything But the Girl.
Right. It's not like an oddity or a footnote in the Tracy Thorn story, you know,
right.
As amazing as her story is on its own. This is a great band and a great record that can stand its own feet. Absolutely.
It stands the test of time for me. I'm going to have to track down the vinyl reissue of this because it's funny because we found so many of our favorite records, rediscovered so many of our favorite records. And yeah, this was a record I loved, but now it feels like it has an amplified sense of importance for me. Like, we have this running joke where I say, oh, this is one of my favorite records of all time. Like, this is a new discovery in my vast canon of favorite records of all time.
Yeah, that's been the greatest joy in the series, is just to like rediscover and re-fall in love. It's like we're renewing our vows with these albums or something. This piece was produced by Janice Headley. Audio is mixed by Roddy Nikpour. Our podcast manager is Isabel Khalili. And Larry Mizell Jr. is our director of editorial.
And as always, we would love it if you donated to KEXP. Our jobs kind of depend on it. Aside from that, you know, everything we do is funded by the listeners, by you all. So if you like what we're doing on the Cobain 50, if you don't like what we're doing on the Cobain 50, but you listen anyway, donate. And on that note, I'm Martin Douglas.
And I'm Dusty Henry. We'll see you next week on the Cobain 50 from listener-powered KEXP, where the music matters.
Because I am sorry.
Yeah. So I need to go home.